And now I would like to welcome panel one, chaired by Professor Naila Kabir, Emeritus Professor at the International Development Department and the International Inequalities Institute at the LSE. And the panel is Women in Agriculture.
Good morning. My instructions are to introduce myself to the audience, but she's already given you a bit of an introduction. But yes, I am Naila Kabir. I just retired in August from the International Development Department, so I'm now Professor Emerita. But I'm also in the faculty of the International Inequalities Institute, and I suspect you will continue to see a bit of me around at the LSE. My work is focused very much on women in the economy. And although I come from South Asia, I am very interested in what is going on in the rest of the world. And you'll be interested to know we had a collaboration with Egypt. And I did a talk about women in economy in Bangladesh. And a very senior Egyptian economist came up to me and said, you could say exactly the same thing about Egypt. You know, similar constraints, similar problems. I'm very pleased that the focus here is on the Middle East and Africa. But we have to understand these are two very different areas, different cultural belts. You know, Africa, and especially West Africa, has been held up as a belt of female farming. You know, women play a huge role in agriculture and in farming, despite not having a great deal of land. Whereas in the Middle East, MENA, South Asia, we come from a culture of the belt of male farming. And there are large restrictions on women's ability and invisibilization of the kind of work that women do in agriculture and in food. So I'm looking forward to two speakers. The third one, who was Hassan Hanwe, has a family, a death in the family, and had to leave. But I hope we'll have time to just have a look at the video that he was going to present to us. So I'm going to introduce the two speakers who are there. Who are here right now, and then ask each of them to be relaxed since we have a little bit more time with the absence of one of our panelists. So on my right is Sarah Al-Batouti, who is an architect and a climate policy specialist with 22 years of experience in sustainable design and development field. She's a senior advisor to the Egyptian president from 2014 to the present time. She's also a United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Global Ambassador, with the high-level champions representing non-state actors. She's a fellow for Vital Voices for Greater MENA 2020 and the first leader of the region to be amongst the impact entrepreneurs by Forbes, receiving the first nomination for the prestigious Earthshot Prize for an architect in the region. And she founded Egypt's leading green building consultancy. I think a lot of us may know, I don't know a great deal about what green building would look like and how that would play out in the rural sector. So I'm looking forward to that. She won that in 2013. And on my left is Imogen Bellwood-Howard, who's a research fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, where, by the way, I was for 25 years. So I'm a kind of a an alumni of the Institute of Development Studies. Her research focuses on food systems and human environment interactions, and she's worked extensively in the West African urban and rural agriculture settings. So we have representatives from both the Arab and the African regions. Her current research interests include sustainable and low-input agricultural practices, and I think the low input is very interesting at a time where we're looking towards sustainability. Does that mean low input or different inputs? Or country region food systems and urban-rural linkages, informal urban and rural food markets, and the application of the circular economy ideas to food systems. So I think what we have here are two people who are working in agriculture in the rural areas and are bringing a kind of climate change angle to the work that they do. So I would ask Sarah to start and maybe speak for 20 minutes. Feel free to tell us what you think is very interesting about the work you do. And remember, a lot of us may not know what green buildings are about.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be here and happy International Women's Day. We're going to see a lot of drawings and visuals, obviously. I wanted to take what was discussed already and move forward with that. And the first thing I want to do is set the big picture from the climate angle, because we have the economic and the geographic picture set very well in the panel previously. So what I'm going to do, being an architect, I'm going to zoom in and out of what's happening. So we look at the big picture and then we zoom into detail and then we see what's going on. It's a different kind of presentation to navigate this complex issue. So the big picture with climate change, just not to get too technical, is we're continuously making things. And in the process of making things, we're also producing emissions. And these emissions are creating heat. And heat is a huge problem. Heat transcends the other visual issues because it is becoming a problem that directly not only affects weather, affects food produce, but it affects us on a day-to-day basis. It affects productivity and health. So heat stress is a huge focus of our work in the MENA region and in Africa. And obviously, it's been since the creation of air conditioning that we've had one stagnant solution that makes us feel better, but is contributing to this vicious cycle of producing more heat. And if you look at it, we have to think about these kind of problems and link between urban, rural, and the built environment the whole time, and the stresses that we're going to face. So this is a long-standing systemic problem that is seeping into every single aspect of our economy. When we come to people, we're at the receiving end. Of course, we're the cause of the problem, but we're also at the receiving end, and we really need to look at the linkages between climate change, this issue, and day-to-day households. So now I'm zooming in from a big issue to what's going on at home. How does this affect women? And why is it no longer a term that is academic or something that we need to have research papers about? It's something that we feel every day. And we need to change the language with how we speak about climate change and make it more day-to-day, make it more attainable and simple. So we have a lot of issues that come with inequalities and vulnerabilities that are directly linked with climate change. Income disparities were discussed. Immobility is another issue. Immobility is a huge issue when it comes to linking urban, rural markets with households, the farm and the home and the woman. There's such a great problem with this issue of how people move that we need to really address and really need to look at the long-term effect of this. And then we zoom into the house. What's going on at home? Are people sleeping well? Are waterborne diseases coming into the food systems? Are people's productivity taking a hit at home and at work? Are women at home because they have to take care of the children but they need to be somewhere on the farm? Does livestock move well? All of these issues affect the house, and it's causing a disparity between the technicalities that we speak about in institutions and through our work and the day-to-day people living this. So there needs to be this language reimagination, I think, about the stressors and the risks and just making it all very human. And that's the work that I'm looking into. And if you look at the relationship between a woman living in a rural community and what she needs out of that community when she steps out of her house, it's very interesting to see that, we need so many different things on the level that is very intimate of awareness and communication at home to things that we just misunderstood. We were working in a village in Cairo, in Inna, which is one of the extremely impoverished villages, and 90% of Egypt's villages are based on agriculture, and the statistics that women do not own land, and 50% of the women are doing this. And there was an issue with not having a training center. No one would finance a training center, and everyone said it's a cultural issue. Women, they go to the workplace and then they come back home. And so we decided to go and speak to the household. Speak to women. Woman talking to another woman. Why aren't you letting your daughter go to the training center? What is the issue? And it's profound because they said it has nothing to do with a woman leaving the house. We are a modern country. We watch TV. We see movie stars, dressed in tight clothes, and they're successful with. What are you talking about? It's dark outside. So my issue is inadequate street lighting. But all of the studies and the perceptions are about the cultural norms. So we have opportunities to fix this issue by having solar lit lampposts, and then you see people leaving and going somewhere. It's simple, it's inexpensive, and all it took was a conversation. None of this fuss about statistics and changing minds and stuff. It's one conversation. And if we look at the awareness that women, and especially indigenous and local communities, have about the challenges with climate change and its effect on their produce and their daily livelihoods, there is so much knowledge there that can be transported into the market. The problem is, when we're trying to solve climate change issues, we don't have enough of the delivery mechanism, like yourselves and me. Very few women are working on climate solution-based companies or startups because of the issues that you were highlighting, because of the lack of finance, because of the lack of women going into STEM. So you have women that know what the problem is, women that want to simplify, and they want to also multitask, being the caregiver, the caretaker, and also the employed income contributor. But they don't have the ability to take these decisions. And men are taking the decisions for them. Men are creating the solutions in their companies with their innovation. Western countries are creating solutions for Africa and the Middle East. So we're importing solutions that sometimes don't make sense or are too expensive to apply. And also at the same time, the innovation and the technology is leaving people behind. It's advanced, it's expensive, it's complicated. So localization is going to save us. Localizing everything so that it makes sense. Everyone is using the word that it's user-friendly, that it's intelligent. It's not intelligent if it doesn't work. It's not intelligent if people are not using it. And in that sense, that's where I can talk to you about green buildings. So we live in buildings 90% of our time. And 90% of our time, we live between different buildings. So when you have a larger income, you use different spaces. You go to school, you go to the airport, you go to the train station, you go back home. And the building sector is the most used product. If you look at a building, that's a box. Every single human being on earth, whether it's a shed or a high-rise, a tower that's very glamorous, we all use buildings. Yet, it is not being treated as such. It's being treated as a built environment. It's not like that. A building is something that takes away from resources to make it and then is continuously feeding in, whether it's air, GHG emissions, waste, heat, culture, knowledge. Buildings are livable things. And they are also things that aren't doing very well. So green buildings are set out to interact with the needs, to reciprocate with the environment that they're in. If it's hot, I need it to be cooler. If people are not sleeping well, I need to use the wind. If the building itself is taking up too much resources, I don't need to over-design and redecorate and all of that. We need to make buildings that are functional, attainable, but also culturally respective and elegant in their respect for the land, respect for the people using it. So a green building is a building that is continuously in conversation with the context. Your client is not the person that has the developer or the budget. Your client is everyone, the community and the climate. And green buildings work very simply in 3 different directions. have cultural relevance, save water, save energy, and save on materials. And this is the exciting new thing that we're talking about. If there is something that has no function in the building, don't do it. So the new thing is to have buildings that look simple but work well. We don't need to overcomplicate that. So that's the green building. And I'm going to go into some recommendations, and then I like to put the recommendations now and then go into technicalities of how they're implemented into a day-to-day project quite quickly. Because recommendations, where do we go from here? So the ecosystem building, which is the setup that I'm trying to do today, just building up this imagination that there is a nexus between housing, building, food, and women. There is a nexus there that we need to explore. And the role of the environment, the built environment with agricultural economies. Accessing land, of course, is a huge issue. And ownership and accessing, inheritance laws to ensure security. I mean, we need to build that ecosystem that was discussed earlier to ensure that people have a kind of security and that people don't fall behind even before they start thinking of being creative. We are at a disadvantage in that sense. Then I want to talk about education and knowledge. And there is a huge link between agriculture and infrastructure. What we're in, what we build, bridges, roads, and everything. Can you imagine the waste and what is happening below the ground all the time? A building is seeping below the ground and seeping into the air. So if you remove a tree from near an old building, you will immediately have cracks in the walls of the buildings because they intertwine, because the roots of the tree can actually grow under. So they're not isolated. It's there, you can see it. So there has to be a respect between topography, the natural environment, and how you build around it. And we don't have that anymore, especially in Egypt. We have complete encroachment in agriculture land by buildings because of this lack of mobility issue. Because how can she move? How can they live here? How can the children go to school? How can she go on the land? That's why we need to ensure that mobility provides this elasticity between the livelihood, the place of sleep, and moving around fairly and equitably. And then informing women about the climate risks, which they already know, but just informing them about forecasting, understanding seasonalities, understanding how a very long winter, or how the day, where sometimes in the Western Desert in Egypt, for instance, we reach 45 degrees in the morning and 9 degrees at night. So you have extremities in one day, and it impacts everything. It impacts the harvest itself. So we need to communicate with this and create campaigns like the ones we've created here with the UN. Really simple visual things. Sometimes it's good to communicate by having cartoons or having like mini series, whichever the communication preferred. Let's use that in our campaigns. And then the financial access that you were talking about. Supporting local producers, but also tweaking how the lending and the support institutions look at localization. If something works in Sweden, it doesn't necessarily work in Rwanda. And the financial sector has to be more aware and educated that they have the same KPIs. And it's getting a little bit strange for us who are practitioners. I mean, that's great if you want to grow algae on the top of the buildings, but I don't have algae in this part of the region, so what are we talking about? So we have ridiculous conversations all the time, and we need to kind of move on from that. This is what we did, for instance. We have embarked on a very ambitious project to create a green certified village in every single governorate in Egypt. And we worked in tandem and in partnership with the presidency and the Ministry of Planning and EBRD, and we have all sorts of partners. But the first thing that I was given is an Excel sheet. They gave me an Excel sheet to describe a village. And I didn't know how to work. I don't work like that. I need to work with people. I need to understand. So I countered with a people's brief. That's my client. This is my client. I'm designing for them, not for the Excel sheet, to humanize it and put a face. And then just to get a bit more complicated, because I know that governments speak in the language of the Sustainable Development Goals, I need to apply the Sustainable Development Goals to the household, even if it's as simplified as this. So we looked at the Sustainable Development Goals and how they would work in a rural household and how this would affect women. And we came back to them and we told them, we are going to draft a contract that's very unique. I'm going to be a project manager and I'm going to let the community be the architect. And I'll watch from afar. Let's see them design the solution, because that way they will worry about the budget, the women. They will look further than the household. They will research more, and the sustainability, because it's theirs, will continue. Looking through this, we looked at the relationship between the household with energy, water, materials, waste, passive cooling, obviously, and we've done some fantastic things. We've reached 10-degree cooling without mechanical assistance. This is a huge breakthrough for having a cooler home without having an AC. A huge breakthrough, because in rural areas, 30% of the household income is going into cooling and heating. It's not going into nutrition. It's not going into healthier food. It's going into making a stupid building work better. That's the argument. So we don't need that. We need to be more creative with what we're doing. And we developed the first green guidelines for rural communities. So the world of green buildings is functioning very well. It's doing amazing things, but it's for very high-end, male-dominated, male-designed urban buildings. You know, and you see outstanding movements happening now. But where is the green rural village from all of this? So we developed these green guidelines with the support of Ashton and Vital. So many partners. I mean, we found collaboration, which happened to be all women-led institutions, coming to us and just pouring their knowledge with us, saying, we found this out. We found out that if you plant chamomile and if you plant this plant, it's an excellent repellent for, rodents. We didn't even know that. So you find amazing facts. And then we took
Sarah,
this.
about 4 minutes.
And then we took this and we started applying it to the very technical standards. So you're moving from drawing, looking into things, simplifying the actions into mini steps that people can attain, and then seeing how the world of green building and design can actually relate to this. And successfully, this whole process of engaging and looking at what is needed succeeded in now having 5 World Green Building certified villages, the first in the world. And this idea is being exported to Latin America. And we just signed with the African Adaptation Initiative not to export us, my business, to export the process of starting with the people's brief. Every people has its brief. So that's your starting point. Your starting point is not how project management is being established. That hasn't worked very well. I'm confident when I speak to financial partners when I say, you've spent this and this is what we got. You built the wrong stadium in the wrong area. You caused, you involuntarily caused an issue with drought here. So bit by bit, small steps work very well in rural communities. And I think by default, I think it might be actually be a blessing in disguise that because there is so much bias and fear to have women do these large-scale projects and everything, we've learned how to get involved in the details. And if we make 1 million small projects that work, I know that the carbon emissions on each of these villages are now exceeding 30% with a minimum amount of investment with tiny tweaking. We've engaged with startups because I've asked government to let me be the manager. So I can tap into who's a carpenter there, who's doing small biogas units, talk to local people, talk to local universities that help me get the testing for thermal quality, and looking into why governments are building asphalt roads, and then you get the local farmer, especially the women, saying, we don't want the asphalt roads, can we just have different kinds of mobility? We have a Vital Voices winner, she's amazing. She's teaching women how to ride bicycles. And that's made a huge difference. There isn't the stigma, again, as your colleague said, that Africa is poor, Egypt is shutting out women from education, the Middle East doesn't want, no, it's there. It's just very scary because for the longest time, the financial, the numbers that they talk about are very big. So when you go with a successful project, we can repeat it, we can have all the villages work this way all over the world, so long as we have the People's Brief guiding us. Through our work, we've also done some remarkable things. This is the
Sarah,
first
you need to wind up.
net zero mosque, and it's for rural communities. The construction workers in this mosque are going to be 50% women as construction workers. So this is a remarkable project that I'm excited about. And we're working towards doing these remarkable soundbite projects and star projects in the coming region. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I have a quick question before we go on. That was all fascinating, but I'm going to come back at the end and maybe pull up some of the things. And I liked your point about mobility and how important it is, and more important in some parts, rural areas. But it says here that you're an architect and climate policy specialist with 22 years experience. When you trained to be an architect, was the climate specialism built into it at that time? No. You acquired it over the period of time. Thank you. That was very interesting. Imran, over to you.
Thanks very much, and thanks to the speakers that have gone before me. Well, I'm going to present an academic's point of view, so I won't be talking about interventions or practical work on the ground, but I want to give some insights into some of the small-scale value chains or agricultural markets from some of my work in West Africa. I'll be bringing more of a social science, maybe anthropological, geographical point of view. And I think I can definitely pick up on some of the points that have been made by previous speakers as well. And I hope that then we can relate this kind of context that I'm going to talk about to some of the bigger pictures that I think we'll pick up on in discussion afterwards. So I want to present some insights from some urban and peri-urban market gardening systems in West Africa that have informed a set of academic publications that me and colleagues have done. So there's one on the left-hand side there. Most of the insights here are about Bamako and Ouagadougou, capitals of Mali and Burkina Faso, and then also Tamalis, a secondary city in Ghana. But many of the things I'm going to talk about are applicable across the continent, more in West and East Africa, and not only in capital cities and urban markets, but also in small-scale farming systems that we've heard already, a majority of women agriculturalists are engaged in. So this particular system here is what one might characterize as one of the smallest scale markets farming systems that exist. This particular version of it is to do with farming vegetables on small areas of land that are mostly destined for quite local or national markets. So they're really important for nutrition. We're not talking about huge amounts of calories. We're talking about really important micronutrients and vitamins that feed into nutritional security, mostly for local people, quite close to where the vegetables are grown. And also very important for culturally important food, which is one of the dimensions of food security, that everybody should have adequate food, nutrition, but also from foods that are culturally relevant, as was alluded to in one of our keynote addresses. In these particular systems, men tend to play the role of farmer and women tend to play the role of marketer, and that's a pattern that's repeated across a lot of small-scale farming systems across the continent, not exclusively, But in these particular systems, men currently tend to have preferential access to land. I just want to trouble a little bit some of the things that I mentioned earlier about land ownership. In none of these systems do men own the land, it's just about access to land. And also women can gain access to land. But it just seems that in these particular contexts, it's been more favourable for women to carve out marketing as a gendered niche for themselves. And in our data, it's interesting to see that the marketing is actually more profitable on a temporal basis. So when you divide profits by time, marketers tend to make more money per, say, week or month, and it's less risky, it's more risk averse, because they have to spread the risk of the transaction only over a few days, whereas men are spreading the risk of all their investments in their vegetables and so on across maybe a season of growing. So women have managed to carve out a social and cultural niche for themselves within that less risky aspect of the food system, which is in a way a social and cultural innovation. Okay. In these particular systems, women tend to transport medium-scale volumes of vegetables by sometimes on head carriage, sometimes by public transport, but often by these motor tricycles to wet markets, which are often arranged in what we call a periodic market system. So these are markets that are spatio-temporally arranged, and a given market in the system would take place on a day in the week, and the week might be 7 days, but it's more likely to be 6 days, maybe 5, 3. In the particular context we were looking at, it was 6 days, but across the continent the market weeks vary in their periodicity. The important thing that I really want to emphasise here is we're going to talk about now, is the really strong social embeddedness of these markets. So marketers and farmers tend to have a relationship of reciprocity and obligations. So each farmer would probably have a few marketers who are obliged to take the goods from him when there's a glut of goods, but then she can also expect that he's going to preferentially give her access to the vegetable goods in the period when they're lacking in the market. And this relationship of obligation and reciprocity acts as a form of insurance, it acts as a risk reduction mechanism, it acts as a form of social solidarity and a way to make the market transactions more reliable for all of these actors, particularly in a situation of environmental variability and increasingly in a situation of climate change. So when environmental variations, both predictable ones and unpredictable ones, trouble the market, people can rely on these relationships of trust between each other in order to help them navigate the risks and the fluctuations in the market. It's also really interesting that those relationships of trust exist in a horizontal fashion as well, because there are a lot of situations where the main customer of a farmer has the opportunity to bring other women to the market, to the process of marketing, and she can organise a harvesting party for the given farmer in such a way that sometimes helps new entrants to farming to get more social connections, but also spreads the goods into the market, reducing the amount of loss, increasing the amount of food nutritional security at the end of the transaction. Women marketers, although they don't necessarily apply their farming knowledge and skills directly by farming the crops on the field, they also provide their skills through the farmers. So they often offer inputs on credit, and they take the goods on credit, and it's interest-free credit, and they frequently advise farmers, particularly new entrants, how to apply the inputs, when to harvest, all of the skills and knowledge that they've acquired from a long career in marketing that will help the farmers to grow the crops best and get the maximum amount of crops into the market, and good quality ones that are going to have high amounts of nutrients in them. So even though they don't prefer to take on all of the risk and have access to the land, women are actually sort of farmers at arm's length in these systems, which is really interesting and not something that I think is often acknowledged in discourse on commercial farming. A lot of the time, the farmers and marketers have social relations outside of marketing. So you may often find a woman harvesting from her son, husband, brother, and so on. But this doesn't mean that they're working as a firm, so combining the profits. They would always keep the profits separate, or very rarely do they work as a firm, as we've observed in this research. And there are implications of that, which I'll explain shortly. So just to zoom out a little bit, in some of the contemporary policy discourse in these countries, particularly in Ghana, this form of very socially embedded marketing has a relatively negative reputation at the national level, which has sometimes been internalised by farmers working in the system. There are some discourses like women traders tend to cheat farmers, women traders tend to conceal prices from farmers, and agricultural transactions should always be spot markets, where farmers should be able to select the best price in a given transaction at a given moment. But I don't think these data quite bear that out, because we can see that farmers and traders are tending to prioritise long-term reliability of their livelihood rather than maximising profit in an individual transaction. So the discourse about spot markets isn't entirely the best way for these people to operate, these actors to operate. And the notion that traders are cheating farmers by concealing the prices from them is not also borne out by our data. Everybody has a mobile phone now. People definitely can communicate to find out what prices are in the market. So I think that may be a discourse that's left over from maybe previous decades. So what is the importance of all of these socially embedded relationships, long-term socially embedded relationships? Well, as I mentioned, the trust notion is really important. People tend to have these relationships in order to navigate the environmental variability of the context they're working in. But also the household embeddedness of some of these activities turns out to be very important. The reason why farmers and marketers tend to embed their trading relationships frequently within their household and community is because whoever ends out better off maybe in a transaction, they find that the benefits trickle down to the family level somehow. So the reproductive responsibilities and the productive responsibilities are very well entwined. We came across several examples there where there was maybe a mum and a dad trading, or a woman and her son trading. And whoever managed to make more profit in the transaction, this would feed into the household and they will ultimately benefit. So, and this is also true at the community level. There's also the fact that people can sometimes choose not to trade solely with their customer, their primary client, but also to divert a little bit of the trade towards a household member in order for that household member's business not to fail. And in such a way, they're supporting livelihoods. And in our research, the discourse was often about the children that they all share some degree of responsibility for, making sure that people in the household are fed, people's livelihoods continue, nobody's business goes bust because they're lending each other a helping hand. Not to the exclusion of their own business thriving, but a kind of socially responsible form of doing business. Okay. And just to sort of zoom out again, this is really important in a social context where social events, life moments such as funerals and outdoorings or baby naming ceremonies play a really central role in reciprocal relationships of solidarity. So I just decided to put some images on the screen here of a funeral. So the bottom left-hand picture is a funeral, people enjoying themselves and playing a role in the celebrations. But the other pictures are from a baby naming ceremony. And the reason I put the picture of people cooking large volumes of food and sharing them out is to emphasize that there are, so these bowls of food are to share around the community to celebrate the new child. And of course, one knows that when one's neighbour has a similar occasion, you will also receive a bowl of such food. So this notion of help was reflected very much in the language that people use to talk to us about their businesses, the way they carry out their business, and about the social context that they exist within. So the notion of help and reciprocity is embedded across these sectors that we in academia tend to divide as economic and social. The discourse is a lot more agential in people's real everyday lives. So overall, I want to argue for a women's role in agriculture and in value chains that is relational, that can deal knowingly with the interaction of reproductive and of productive labour, and it does so in such a way that minimises risk and maximises resilience in the entire value chain and in the business system, the agribusiness system. It might seem at first glance that women might be slightly disadvantaged in being less inclined to access land in these settings, but in a closer examination, you might realise that they're choosing to undertake a role in the agricultural system that's less risky, that has more advantages for them over the medium term and across seasons. But they're not trying to do that in a way that disadvantages men with their gendered roles as well. They're working together in an agricultural household system that tends to manage risk slightly better. And just to play maybe devil's advocate a little bit, one opinion is that this might be a better way of managing risk than in a system where people take credit that attracts interest. So one of the discourses that many of our protagonists relayed to us was that taking interest-free loans from each other was far preferable to them than going in for larger loans with unaffordable interest rates attached to them, which was why they chose to stay in this system rather than attempting to move to a more corporate system where they have to go into the formal financial sector. So there's food for thought here. So these actors definitely have agency. There is a rationale for the way that they're existing within this system that doesn't necessarily chime with all of the notions that we hear in the dominant development discourse and the policies of their countries. But they're not doing this in a disempowered way, they're actually empowering themselves through some of their choices to do with their local businesses. Yeah. But that's not to romanticise this system. You know, I still want to point out a lot of factors for improvement that could be taken on board by development actors and also by local policy. So we heard just now about the need for better infrastructure. Absolutely, these people need to be supported by investment in appropriate transport and storage facilities. I am really happy to hear about green building, and I think when it comes to storage facilities, we don't need to be talking about, say, large concrete air-conditioned warehouses, but we do probably need to be talking about maybe publicly provided or maybe small entrepreneurs who are building cool houses with natural materials where people could maybe have access to those on maybe a paid or maybe a cooperative basis. They do need to continue to be taxed, and that taxation needs to be used to upgrade the facilities that they use. So the market ladies pay tax in such a fashion that when they enter the market, they pay a daily rate if they're going to market today. And this needs to be used appropriately to provide, for example, running water in the market, as I said, maybe storehouses, toilets, appropriate access roads. So some of the markets have not received appropriate investment, and they need to receive that for the businesses to flourish. There needs to be a relaxed approach, the continuation of the relaxed approach that we've observed to town planning, to seating. We don't want to see the approach that has been reported from historical examples in Zimbabwe, for example, where hawkers and informal traders are cleared off the street because they look untidy, they're not fitting with modern ideas of town planning. Spaces need to be provided where those people can conduct their livelihood activities. Women who don't want to necessarily hire a shop front to sell vegetables all year long need to be able to have access to public space to pursue their livelihood activities if they want to, in a way that supports their reproductive roles as well as productive labour all the time. And there also needs to be...
Imogen, will you kind of...
I'm wrapping up, yeah. There also needs to be appropriate support to this sector in comparison to other corporate and more business-oriented sectors. So governments and local councils should continue to support the medium-scale supermarkets, the slightly more corporate entrants that might come in, but not to the disadvantage of these informal sector actors. They also need to be equally supported in the wet market sector to the formal approaches. Maybe the last thing I would say, I think I said it already really, but just to emphasise that access to capital needs to be a bit nuanced. So if people are going to be gaining access to larger size loans, like these people tend to give each other up to $100, $200 of a loan, if they want to gain access to more than that, it has to be on similarly advantageous terms, so not something like a 20% interest on them. So yeah, so those are all my observations from the field. I hope it's food for thought, and in the discussion we can connect them to the wider principles. Thank you.
Thank you. we started a bit late, so I'm eating into the coffee time. But I'd like to give people at least 10 minutes for Q&A. But I just want to say that one of the things that crossed my mind listening to both of you is how, what you're talking about, and I'm not saying we should all model our lives on what's happening in your part, but adapt. I think what's the common thread is how do we put a brake on consumerism? You talk about buildings with all these fancy things because, you want to look like you live in a fancy apartment, and you talk about, it's the micronutrients that matter, not massive diets, huge amounts of food. But underlying it is trying to put a brake on a world that values consumerism. The more you consume, the more you eat, the more fancy you're building. That's going to be a hard shift. But, I think we're never going to achieve the kind of sustainable livelihoods and environment that we're talking about if we don't, all of us, start wanting less. But especially those people at the very top, whose consumerism has gone kind of mad, completely mad. Anyway, those are my very quick thoughts. I'd just like to open it up to anyone who has a question or a comment. We've got about 10 minutes.
We can just play the video before the Q&A.
Okay, we have time? All right. Okay, this is the video that Hassan would have spoken to, and maybe our two experts here can just elaborate if any thoughts they have. It's a short video.
Agriculture is in the heart of ESG. You cannot have ESG without agriculture because agriculture deploys 25% of the world population. It goes up to 50 or 60% when you talk about developing nations. Growing in such a harsh environment is a challenge. However, it's also a responsibility.
For LSE Agro, the S in ESG means using the lessons learned in the arid landscape of home in the UAE to help others in partnership with the government, providing training for growers from rural African communities on sustainable farming methods and technologies that can transform the arts of achieving greater self-sufficiency in harsher climates. And intervention goes beyond advice and teaching. LSE Agro have developed the Smart Farm, a portable kit that can make a defining difference.
It comes fully packed in one container. It can operate completely off-grid using clean energy from solar power. The solar power can generate enough electricity to operate a cold store, along with an irrigation system with a dripper line sufficient to irrigate 1 hectare of land. Giving back to society, embracing, empowering small stakeholder farmers who, till today, produce 60% of the food is an important responsibility for all of us. By that, we can support the subsistence of a family in a developing nation to have good production, quality production, and sufficient production to feed it and its constituents.
Thank you. So, just very quickly, my understanding is that this is technology that allows small-scale farmers to both fuel or drive irrigation systems and a storage plant. Is that right?
It looks like it.
Cooling.
Cooling plant. Okay. It wasn't clear to me. Anyway, we will. Have you got anything? Any comments on the film?
Just to say that that's the type of technology that can help such small-scale farmers and ag marketers if it's supplied in the right way, with a massive markup they have to pay.
Yeah. Any comments?
Yeah, the fact that it's compacted, the solution is compacted, it resolves this idea of mobility. So you have your energy, you have your water supply, and you have your storage all in the same area, and that saves a lot of transaction costs for these farmers.
Excellent. I'm really glad this is being recorded, because I'm not going to be, people who are not here, and also those of us here who can't remember all this information, it's going to be on record. Any comments? Any questions? Yes, over there.
Shall I just yell?
Oh, wow.
There seems to be a microphone here, which may work.
I've got quite an unfit voice, so
Keep-
I think we'll be fine. I'm Honor Eldridge. I'm an LSE alumni, and I'm writing a book on the future of food at the moment. I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts around how there's a role for new technologies in transport. I think that we talk a lot about what is happening on the farm and what is happening in retail, global north and global south, but I think it's interesting to consider how innovation can help ensure that food is actually getting from the field to the market in a way that is ensuring sustainability and climate, but also is considering food security and the loss that's en route. And I'd also be very interested, Imogen pointed out that this is a good example of technology in the field, and I would be curious to hear your thoughts on some of the sort of climate smart technologies that are being deployed in the field at the moment, and whether that is a positive or potentially whether there are some negatives too. So those are my two questions.
Thank you. Any other quick comments over there? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for a very, very stimulating panel. I have a question for Sarah. The excellent example you shared with us from Egypt, has it been replicated or introduced in other countries in the Arab region or North Africa?
Thank you. I'll take one more over there. That's it. Over there.
Hello, my name is Irene Silwanis. I am a visiting fellow from the LSE Middle East Centre and an associate professor at the Faculty of Economics and Political Science at Cairo University in Egypt. Very happy to be here and happy International Women's Day to everyone. And thank you for the presentation. I have two questions, one for Imogen and one for Sarah. The first one for Imogen, I was wondering about the contexts of the three countries you talked to us about, whether the matrilineal context or the patrilineal context play a role in it. And my question point, I want to further reflect on how could this model perhaps be thought for other countries that have different gender norms. So I'm thinking about, for example, the North African countries where gender norms are very much patriarchal, whether women marketers will be able to really have the money and the profits, or they have to give it to the household enterprises, given that relationships are more different and there are household enterprises through which this model can happen. So I'm imagining gender norms would play differently across the African countries, and also this idea of gender norms, and perhaps in those three countries there are very strong matrilineal contexts. I'm not sure, so I want to hear more from you. For Sarah, have you done any impacts, because I come from a labor market perspective, have you done any studies on the impact on job creation, or have there been any studies on the expected employment opportunities that would, or if you've done anything about that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll take it there. I'll let Sarah respond first and then come to Imogen. Yeah.
Anna, is it?
Honor. But yeah.
Honor, hi.
Whatever.
Hi. So one of the really important technologies is understanding what happens to water that is wasted. So not all the farmers, they have efficient irrigation. So the level of wastage of water for agriculture, this is where the technology is still working its way. The solutions are predominantly what to do with recycling and repurposing the water. Of course, there are filtration systems, and there are pumps, and there are all sorts of things that are there. They're quite expensive. So if you look at technology of producing biogas and composting, they tend to be very attainable for small-scale farmers. When it comes to water resource management, it's quite expensive. In our region, solar energy is a fantastic way. You have 360 days of optimum sunlight, great weather for it. The maintenance can be taught. Unfortunately, we still do not produce the photovoltaic cells in our region. So the technology is holding us back, but the components of building the panels themselves, for having steel structures, corrugated sheet, like the example that Hassan used, it's all there. It's all very, very affordable. It is the technology that isn't being adapted quick enough, which then produces income disparities. So a lot of the energy and the water programs are being subsidized, or they have to be, they have to go into borrowing models. So it's minor changes, and now so many small startups, local startups, are trying to resolve this. Dr. Haifa, the model now is being presented. So we presented this at COP28. COP28, they're definitely more focused because of the social differentiations between farmers in Egypt and the amount of technology that the UAE is investing in producing its own food and having its own autonomy with its food security and also exporting. They're very much interested in the buildings themselves and implementing net zero principles to the building. So we've had an introduction to that and collaborations. We've also had, we were involved in COP16, for looking at land degradation and working with KAUST University. So Saudi and the UAE are definitely interested in this. Morocco is interested in the village aspect of it. So everyone is taking what they want, which I think is great. This is exactly the setup that we want, and we want to train more architects there to run with it. And Irini, your final, your question is, it's exceptionally difficult to equate every village as a standard, because some villages, they require, something like 750 million EGP. And some villages, they require 20. So what we're trying to do is that the local labor there, so if they are workers, carpenters, bricklayers, the women are farmers, the women are creating handcrafts, education, teachers, etc. We're trying to hire them from the village. Obviously, we have to work on a greater municipal level, because sometimes we don't have enough population. We do not have the teachers. We have to outsource the teachers from the University of, Aswan University to work in Faris village. So what we're trying to do is that we do not import labor from other municipalities. The governorate is the one that will highlight the entrepreneurs, but we ask locally. So at any point, you are creating labor, but it depends on the size of the village. The benchmark is at least 75% of the people working on the village with their hands, with their minds, with their academia, with their assistants, are from the local community. 75%. The rest is the representatives from the government, the representatives from the financial sector, and like myself, we're all outsiders. The model is eventually, if we can have this emulated and taught at local universities and taught at schools, then they won't need us, which is my measure for success. They won't need the outsiders. It will be 100% powered by the local community.
Thank you.
Thanks, yeah. Okay, to the questions about new tech in transport and technology in general, I guess I don't have a load of insight about transport technology, but I would just note that those little motor tricycles that I had a picture of have been a big improvement for marketers in those contexts I was referring to. I wish they were not diesel powered, I wish they were electric powered or even animal traction, but working towards greener versions of local transport is really important. And that's also another reason why we do need to be focusing what I call the periodic markets, the local markets, where you don't have to rely on refrigerated long distance transport, because people are getting food from really local to themselves. So it's again a focus on mobility, like a focus on locality, rather than trying to travel hundreds of food miles with high technology. Maybe a little comment. I think you asked about climate smart technologies in fields, and I guess I would say, or in farming in general, I guess I would say that from my point of view, that the technology itself isn't a thing, it's how it's used. So is it used in an empowering way for farmers? Do farmers have decisions about the type of technology they're using and how, and ownership maybe of it, or is it being offered to them on exploitative terms? I think that's more what we've got to look at with technologies. And then to the question about the patrilineal or otherwise nature of the context. Well, these contexts were urban, and one was quite ethnically homogenous and the others relatively ethnically diverse because they're capital cities. The patrilineal or matrilineal nature of it wasn't important because that's more about inheritance, but they're definitely patriarchal systems, I can definitely say that. But what's really interesting is that in none of these systems, or frankly any that I've read about in the small-scale commercial agriculture sector, are women obliged to embed their commercial activities within the households. It's very rare for women to be obliged to hand over their money to the male members of the household. Although with land access, that's a different matter. Like in some areas of southern Ghana, there is a lot of contention about whether when a woman inherits land or not, but that wasn't the case here because, like I said, nobody's inheriting land. They're all just renting, or not even renting, just borrowing land to farm on. But
borrowing from whom?
Family members, community members, even householders who haven't yet built their land. They've purchased land in the formal land market, and the land is just lying idle while they wait to build it. And it's almost a form of security to have a farmer farming on it, to keep an eye on it against encroachers. So various mechanisms of access. But I have to say, even in historical research that I've done, even in the areas of northern Nigeria where women are in Purda and they don't exit the house, they still have sometimes their own vegetable trading businesses, their own. They don't hand the cash over to anyone. They send out their maybe sons or so on to trade the vegetables, and the woman still owns that. I'm not saying that there aren't circumstances where women are obliged to merge their businesses with the household economy, but I think maybe it's a hopeful or optimistic thing. From my observation, it's relatively rare. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that was an excellent session. Coffee break or?